America is facing a seismic shift, and to get the stories behind the noise, the media sound bites, social media, and big data, we spoke with a cross-section of Americans in 2020 during the COVID-19 pandemic and the Black Lives Matter movement.
Based on what we heard, if we're to unite this nation, we're going to need to foster change from the bottom up, together. No one is coming to save us.
As we were telling this story, the murder of George Floyd shocked the world, igniting an international uprising on race. The dehumanization, policing, and criminalization of Black Americans dates back to the slave patrols in the 1600s. It was the obligation of militias to control the movement of enslaved people with severe punishment for infractions.
And throughout our history, Black people have been terrorized by militias, sanctioned and unsanctioned by the government, including organizations like the Ku Klux Klan.
In What Exposes African Americans to Police Violence, published in the 2016 Harvard Civil Rights Civil Liberties Law Review, Devin Carbato and Patrick Rock outline several reasons behind this violence.
Racial segregation, which concentrates African Americans in areas in which entire communities are criminally suspect, makes African Americans out of place and suspicious when they're not in predominantly Black areas. They go on to say, racial stereotypes of African Americans as criminally inclined renders African Americans hyper-visible to the police, increasing the likelihood that police will target them, particularly those that are marginalized.
But this moment is about more than policing. These protests emanate from a lack of historical reconciliation.
My father was ill after the war. He had been a student at Hampton Institute, historically Black college. When he went into the military, I'm sure he was a good soldier in a segregated army with all the things that he had to endure with the cold weather in France and then come home and be diagnosed with tuberculosis that soon shortened his days. I think he was in his late 40s, and so I guess we'll never really know the full potential of what he could have been or what he would have become had he not gotten sick. But he too gave all to his country, this beautiful country, as many Blacks have, with no recognition, because when my father passed away, he could not be buried in the National Cemetery. Other than the flag, there was no other recognition. He was entitled to it, but not given it because of his race. But he gave all regardless.
But after World War II, programs like the GI Bill gave Black servicemen unprecedented hope. Access to home ownership and free college tuition created a prosperous American middle class.
But the money was distributed by the states, and as a result, many Black people were systematically denied access to GI benefits. This created a financial glass ceiling and devalued Black neighborhoods.
About 1969, just 1 year after the passage of the Fair Housing Act, there was a couple here in Washington, D.C., married with two boys that decided to move to New Jersey. And in New Jersey, they encountered a lot of what was called real estate steering, where Black couples were steered away from certain neighborhoods. They grew frustrated, realizing that they were being steered away from white neighborhoods, and they sought the help of the Fair Housing Council. And they set up an elaborate sting operation where my parents would go look at a home, or this couple would go look at a home, and they would then be followed by a white couple. If the couple was told that the house was sold or not for sale, the white couple would then appear and find out if that was indeed true. And most often for this couple from Washington, D.C., yes, they would find out the house was still for sale. And Eventually, this couple found a house in a small town called Harrington Park, New Jersey, that they loved, but they were told that the house was not for sale. And the white couple pretended as if they loved the house, like the black couple did, and put a bid on the house. The bid was accepted, and on the day of the closing, instead of that white couple showing up, the African-American gentleman from the black couple and a volunteer lawyer came to confront the real estate agent. The real estate agent, in fact, was so upset that he stood up and punched the lawyer representing the black couple and sigged the dog on the African-American man. But yet the law was on their side. The Fair Housing Law of the United States of America.
Against this backdrop, George Floyd's murder sparked uncensored anguish, with one of the deepest questions coming from an unexpected place.
They're spewing this fear. We're the ones getting killed. We're the ones getting shot. And all you do is keep hearing about fear. It's amazing to me why we keep loving this country and this country does not love us back. It's just really sad. We got to do better.
So the question is, why doesn't America love us back? I would challenge it in some ways. I would actually break up America and think about it as the people versus the system and structures. Given that we are only 12% of the population, if you can show me one aspect of American culture that is not inordinately influenced by Black people, again, 12% of the population, whether we are talking about sports, professional sports, or food or music, I think that the amount of support and passion and money, even politics, there are so many signs that speak to love affair with Black culture, and I think that will only grow as millennials and Gen Z age up into powerful positions. And I think part of the reason they love us is that we are America. We are the embodiment of the American dream. If we think about the history of America and the idea of sort of fleeing this authoritarian reign in England, the idea of the Boston Tea Party and rioting, and claiming that all men are created equal, and the idea of democracy and the principles that underpin it. While it hasn't been perfect, it is the story of every immigrant and specifically every Black person that we've been able to be resilient and prevail and persist. So, is there an element of the American people that don't love us? Absolutely. I think they're in the minority. Now, the system that is America, I think it doesn't love us because it wasn't designed for us. The American capitalist system needed us for a very sort of functional reason at one point in history.
Exploring and going out west, and all those are just based on colonialist ideas of discovery, of navigation, of ownership, of land ownership, of working and then becoming wealthy, because there'll always be the structure of people underneath you that you need to keep fearful and subjugated and terrorized to keep those financial structures in place. But I have never really thought of this country as a welcoming home environment that you just personally carve your story out of. So to look for reciprocity in a country that is not necessarily built for that, for anyone, it's not a love fest, but there's so much less room to operate if you have such a smaller margin between life and death, feast and famine here if you're Black.
What happens when someone does something wrong? That eats at that person And that leads to guilt. Guilt then leads to resentment. And resentment leads to the ego trying to rationalize why the aggressor did that behavior. And what we have in the United States is a situation where white Americans have been able to rationalize the behavior and the injustices of 300 plus to 400 years. And until collectively everyone decides that it is okay to recognize the injustices that occurred and authentically apologize for it, the resentment will always lead to guilt, which will always lead to rationalization of the actions that have been taken against an entire race of people.
Where we are as a nation is at a point of reckoning. And there is a call to sort of rebuild America, to not become authoritarian. We are taking to the streets and having our own Boston Tea parties, very much in the spirit of America's architects.
We protest and they send riot guards, right? They send people in riot outfits. They go to Michigan with guns and they're spitting on cops and nothing happens. The training has to change in the police force. The unions have to be taken down in the police force. My dad was a cop. I believe in good cops. We're not trying to defund the police and take all their money away. We're trying to get them to protect us, just like they protect everybody else.
I remember vaguely when the Rodney King riots happened, and I thought that was nuts. I didn't understand all the looting. I didn't understand why somebody being beat up by a police officer automatically made it okay to go out and go steal stuff. That just didn't make sense to me. And then this time when it happened, and it's all over the country happening, that doesn't make it any less as to what happened to this poor man. But the way in which people reacted it was wrong in my eyes. Protesting is fine in my book. I have no problem with protesting. But going out and rioting, though, however, I think is a much different story. I just think that just, it broke my heart. I saw something on Facebook. It was a elderly black man who had a food truck. And he's screaming at these people. He goes, "Why did you do that? I came from the ghetto. I came there just like you did. And this is my business. This is my life. You've taken my life away from me." And it just broke my heart because I thought they have no idea what they're destroying. And because of that, they're destroying lives of people that may never be able to recover from it.
But my 10-year-old was horrified and immediately, on her little TikTok account, changed her profile to Black Lives Matter. And then a few days later was like, and she didn't have the right words, but she was like, "Mom, I don't want to be appropriating. So maybe I need to change my profile." And she's like, "But this is really, really important." And, she had read The Hate U Give last year and she was really moved. And I said, "Does this feel like what you read about?" And she goes, "Well, no, this is real and this is worse." And she said, in the book, I don't know if you've read the book or seen the movie, but it's a snap decision. And she said, this was not a snap decision when George Floyd died. There was many minutes that they could have made that choice. And, I'm having this conversation with a 10-year-old.
I think, we should be outraged. And I think we can discuss about how we should direct this outrage. Any other nation in the world, in any other country in the world, if the government were in charge of systematically killing disproportionately one race versus another, it would obviously be considered horrifying.
The guy that got killed, what happened to him was not right. The cop did very bad and was wrong, and so was his counterparts that were there with him. That was obvious in the video. However, people's reactions, their wrong does not justify it. All it is doing is escalating or snowballing a bad situation as it was. There's no reason that you got to be violent to make your voice heard. If any of that stuff comes out here, I carry for a reason. I don't want to have to go that route, but I will.
Are there any peaceful protests going on right now?
The media is not reporting a single one. They're just as screwed up as the government.
Yeah.
The blacks and whites, we should both be equal. Nobody's better than the next person. Well, it was wrong for the cop to kill the black guy. It is wrong. But they just took it to extremes and just blew it up all over the news. And that's when they started protesting.
And so what do they want?
I guess they just want more protection for them, blacks. They want you to look at them and respect them. They think that everybody's against them.
So what do you think about all this?
I think they should just keep their mouth shut. The more they talk, the worse it gets. They want to say Black Lives Matter. They shouldn't say Black Lives Matter. They should say all lives matter, not just black. I still think they want us to bow to them because of the slavery back years ago. They want to be more than what they are. And they're going to extremes to do that. They want to be above us, white people.
So, is there an element of the American people that don't love us? Absolutely. I think they're in the minority. I think that those folks are fear-driven. I think they are ruled by what feels like a loss of power. I think that equality to people who have benefited from privilege feels like oppression.
I think that we have been so complacent, especially over the last, I would say, 10 years since the recovery started, to think that, wow, practically every black person or Hispanic person who wants a job has a job. No one has really thought about the fact that we have some systemic problems that sit within our community. And one of those is healthcare. We haven't really talked about it in the terms of how poor people are totally disenfranchised and affected by that. In some ways, it's like it's economic racism along with racism of color.
My family's all from Alabama. My wife's family is all from the mountains of Virginia. And where I grew up, race was never a subject that was off the table. It was ever present. And as I say to a lot of my friends, it's not your turn to talk. You need to do some listening, and then let's learn and let's talk and let's make some progress from there. And don't be defensive about it. Just be open to having a different perspective on things that you have taken for granted. One of the things in this particular moment that has struck me is that white people are open to this kind of conversation now in a way that is not reflexively defensive. It's always kind of been, well, not me, or, well, you've got enough, or look at all we've done for you, blah, 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 all that kind of defensiveness. You just don't see as much of that. I don't think we get very many chances like this. And I think this is one of these moments in time where we've got a unique opportunity to see some progress.
We have gotten to this point where we acknowledge that something's not working. And so that's a huge shift for me, because before everything was, we've had enough conversation about this topic. Let's just go on with our lives. Why do we have to keep bringing this up?
So Todd Gitlin is a sociologist, and in one of his books, The Twilight of Common Dreams, he made the observation that early on, liberals decided to fight the culture war in universities, and conservatives decided to fight the culture war at the ballot box. And in the universities, it was really started in humanities departments, and at the ballot box, it really started at local school boards and local state legislatures, and they both expanded from there. So we are actually now in a moment where we are seeing which strategy was the smarter strategy. And I actually think we now have a generation of people, a couple of generations, who have gone through a university education where they have seen a very different perspective on life in America than has kind of been the commonly held view. And now you have a generation of people who have a different perspective on all these things. And so I think this is actually the moment when this generation has come into power in its ability to shape the broader social conversation that we have in America today. So that's kind of my one sort of theory about it, just based on that observation that Gitlin made a long time ago when he wrote that book. But I think the other thing that makes this very different is that we've been through this before. We've had these kinds of things happen before, and I think they've just built up. And I think they built up to the breaking point. And I think we finally got the straw that broke the camel's back. And it happened in a particular moment in time that was well suited for it. And now, to mix metaphors, the dam has burst. But it was going to happen.
I think that we need to rebuild America to be in line with the principles of founding fathers. And I think that the people of America will not let the American dream fall by the wayside.